to try to denigrate our founding fathers, to try to act like our country had an illegitimate founding, that is wrong, and we're not going to allow that to happen in the state of Florida.
Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in to The Florida Standard. I am joined today for our first in-person interview with Governor Ron DeSantis of the state of Florida. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me and being here today.
Welcome to Tallahassee.
Yeah, or I guess me being here today, being in the governor's mansion. You turned down The View and are now doing things with the Florida Standard. It's kind of funny how that goes. And I wanted to actually bring that up and talk to you about it. We've seen conservatives actually go on The View before. We've seen, Don Jr. among others. What was your decision like for not going on The View and some of these other leftist talk shows?
Well, the interesting thing is I found out I wasn't going on The View when it made it into the media, that my staff had declined it because they know better than to even ask me whether I would go on in the first place. Look, I have a state to run. I've got a lot of stuff on my plate. I've got a family, I've got a lot of things. I got to pick and choose what I want to do, and I think that there are a lot of corporate media outlets in this country that are just dedicated to pursuing partisan narratives and trying to smear people who dissent from those narratives. And first of all, I don't think that they're helping our country. I don't think that they're dedicated to the truth. But why do I want to be involved in that? I don't want to give them any extra eyeballs or any extra clicks, and so it's just not something that I'm interested in.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing this with me. I think it's important that you said, you're working in the state of Florida. I think you have a lot of people who are in politics or in conservative media, whatever it is, and they're working for themselves and not necessarily working for the people. But I mean, with that new ad that you put out and many of the other, I'm sure, thousands of letters that you're getting, people understand that you are working for them in a way that a lot of other governors aren't across the country. I think that Florida is a blueprint for a lot of things that are happening across the country, and other governors, Republican governors, take notice. What is the blueprint of Florida that you think is so successful?
Well, I think what we've done is, when it was not easy to do, we took stands against the prevailing narrative, against the media, against the Faucis of the world, to lift people up, to protect their ability to work, businesses, kids in school, freedoms from mandates. And that has really been the foundation of Florida doing better than most of these other states. And so people, I think, when they see that you're fighting for them and when you're willing to do it when it's not easy, they do appreciate that, because quite frankly, they're not used to seeing elected officials do that. When they talk about some of the letters writing in, a huge percentage of them are people saying, I have never written in to anybody elected to office before, but I have to tell you what you did for me or my mother or my friend. Thank you for doing that. And so part of it was just the circumstances we found ourselves in with COVID and how other states went in a radically different direction and we kind of cut against the tide. But we've been able to really impact people personally, because when you start talking about people's jobs, their livelihoods, whether their kids could even be in school, things like mandates that they wanted to impose where some cop would lose his job based on a COVID jab. And so we stood for people on that. And so they really, really do appreciate it. But at the end of the day, I think when in the situation we find ourselves, and there's a lot of different issues you got to be right on, but when the issues are really important, they're going to come at you when you take strong stands. And the question is, when it gets hot in the kitchen, are you going to be able to stick it out, or are you going to go cut and run? And I think in Florida, we take the stand, people know that I'm for them, and they know that I'm not going to back down.
I think something that's important is that in terms of your office, the office that you hold as governor of the state, you're not afraid to use that office to get things done for the citizens of the state of Florida. And I think that there are a lot of people who are afraid to use the power that they have to actually get things done. And one of the things that you've done that a lot of people in Florida would say is so successful is education. What is the education agenda for this next year coming up?
Well, I think we've really, been the focal point in the country of the parents' rights movement. That parents have a fundamental role to be involved in the education and upbringing of their kids. We signed the Parents' Bill of Rights a year ago. We signed curriculum transparency this year. Amazingly, there's some people in our society that don't think parents should know what curriculum is being used in their kids' school. Of course, we did the Parents' Rights in Education, which got a lot of media attention, which prohibits the sexuality in the elementary schools. And those are all very important. But at the end of the day, our bright line is, the school system is to educate kids, not to indoctrinate kids. And we've done huge across the board. We have the leading school choice programs in the country. We did the biggest compensation increases for teachers that Florida has ever done, so we can recruit more to come into the profession. We've expanded workforce. I'm a big believer in there's a lot of in-demand jobs right now that don't require a college degree. And so if you go $100,000 in debt from a degree with a degree in zombie studies, and then you end up wondering why you don't have a job out of school, there's people that are getting concrete skills in high school, in our state colleges, that are making $100,000 a year very quickly. So we've really embraced that, and we've said a 4-year brick and ivy is not the only way that you can be successful. But we also have said, yes, we don't want the ideology in the classroom like CRT. We're not going to teach kids to hate our country. We're not going to teach them to hate each other. We're going to make sure we teach accurate history, and certainly to scapegoat some 6-year-old kid based on their race one way or another is totally wrong. But we also have a responsibility to have a positive agenda. So we've doubled down on American civics. We've had more civics since I become a governor than we've ever done in Florida in the modern history of the state, to include things like teachers can now go through a training program and they get a $3,000 bonus. So they're learning helping with continuing education on the real history, dispelling a lot of the myths that you see out there. But at the end of the day, all these students are going to end up being citizens. They're going to exercise those duties, whether they're doctors, business people, plumbers, you name it. And we owe them a foundation so that they can make sense of the world around them. I don't want to be graduating a bunch of listless vessels that don't have a foundational understanding about what it means to be an American.
Yeah, well, your opponents will say that this history that you guys are teaching now is whitewashing history and it's racist. How do you combat these people's opinions on that?
Well, if you actually read Florida statutes, things like slavery, segregation, the civil rights movement, they are required under Florida statutes to be taught. And I think that they absolutely should be. And honestly, if you teach kids the foundation of American principles, you see how it was those principles from 1776 that Lincoln used during the Civil War to justify eventually the abolition of slavery. Martin Luther King, when he was on the Lincoln Memorial steps for the civil rights movement, he wasn't talking about leftist neo-Marxism. He was talking about the Declaration of Independence. And so really those principles have animated all these major periods in American history. Of course, the Second World War, the Cold War, separated us from the Soviets because we believed in God-given rights. The Soviets believed in government as basically being supreme. So that's really important to do. And of course, you teach the highs, the lows, the triumphs, the tragedies. But what they want to do is they want to manipulate history to be able to advance a modern partisan agenda. For example, the 1619 project that the New York Times did, they said the American Revolution was fought to protect slavery, which is just a lie. I mean, we know why the American Revolution's fought. They wrote pamphlets about it. People have written books about the philosophical underpinnings about it. They wrote what they wrote in the Declaration of Independence. So why would they want to lie about that? Well, they want to delegitimize the founding of this country. And they want to act like the country was founded based on white supremacism, which that was not what they were doing. And so it doesn't mean you don't teach the truth about what actually happened, but to manipulate that, to try to denigrate our founding fathers, to try to act like our country had an illegitimate founding, that is wrong, and we're not going to allow that to happen in the state of Florida.
Yeah, and you brought up Lincoln there, talking about the Civil War. And Lincoln also referenced the Bible and a lot of things he was doing, especially when it came to the abolition of slavery. And I know that there's a lot of people, I come from California, so a little bit more than here, but there's a lot of people in this country and still probably in this state who are worried about religious freedom and things that are happening, whether it came to vaccine mandates, churches closing down. How is the state of Florida looking to protect people's religious freedom here?
Well, we always said people had a right to go to church throughout COVID. That was their decision, and the churches could work with their parishioners. There was no way we were going to forcibly close churches like they did in places like California. I mean, you had places where churches were closed, but liquor stores and strip clubs were open. This is a fundamental First Amendment right that's protected under the Constitution, and yet it was just brushed aside for a long time in some of these jurisdictions. So it was a huge, huge threat. I think in Florida, we do it very well. I mean, we've had a strong Religious Freedom Restoration Act for a long time. Obviously, we're going to keep doing that. What you now have, though, I think the prospect on the U.S. Supreme Court, you have 6 pretty good votes now for religious liberty. The fact that a high school football coach has to go all the way to the Supreme Court because he just decided to kneel and pray after a football game, that's somehow an establishment of religion, give me a break. That is a manipulation of what the Constitution says. And so I think you're going to start to see a lot of these areas like California which have tried to crimp people's religious freedom. I think they're going to run into some problems in the courts. And I think once these cases get to the U.S. Supreme Court, people that are in favor of religious freedom, they're going to have a very favorable court with which they can win some serious victories.
Yeah, and you're going to turn every person in California into a massive nihilist. Going back to the children, I mean, we just saw the complaint that you guys are filing against the bar in Miami for the drag show with kids. And I wanted to follow up on that and say, what is the status of that? And also, are there going to be further actions that are going to be taken? Is this going to be a precedent throughout the rest of the state for any of these types of restaurants or bars that host these kinds of things? And will there also be more charges brought upon the people who conduct that type of activity? Because to me, I see it as in some ways, a very disgusting act that you are bringing children into a sexual environment. It might take more than a complaint. Would you agree?
Well, so here's the thing. This video came out with this. Well, there was videos in Texas, other places, and it was like really shocking to see that happening. Then there was one. They said, "Hey, this is in Florida." So our agency started to investigate. They actually sent people down there to go to this drag bar, and they were documenting very young children that were there. So clearly this is what they do. It's not appropriate. And so under current Florida law, they are not entitled to a liquor license, which obviously if they don't have their liquor license, it really can't function at that point. I mean, that's a huge, huge issue for any of these establishments to maintain that. So that was a really strong step that was done. I think as more information comes out about any other establishment, they're going to be treated the same. I mean, it's not going to be this one's being picked on. We believe that to do business in Florida means you do business in the best interest of the community without exposing very young children to sexually charged performances. And people say, "Oh, well, what about this? What about this?" I can tell you, I've not seen that growing up in the state of Florida, where you literally would have, I think they had a drag queen, the picture, holding the hand of it looked like a 3 or 4 year old girl.
Yeah.
And how is that something that's not? So we don't want to do that now. So that'll go. If there's more cases, as more evidence comes in, there'll be other establishments. I hope it's not a lot in Florida. I mean, I hope that this is an aberration. And I'm sure in certain parts of the state, this would not ever fly. But, it is what it is. We're a big state. So we'll see how that happens. Now, if the legislature, when they come back in after the election, if there's something that they need to do to legislate, I think that the incoming speaker is interested in looking at that. So a lot of this stuff is going to be evolving over the next few months. But clearly, what was done on those videos was very disturbing. The action that the state agencies have taken was very appropriate, and it's going to take a little bit of time to work through the process. But I do think that we're going to be successful.
And more with these businesses, not just with the drag shows. I mean, you have all this ESG and kind of business social credit score going around. What is Florida's plan to curb that? Again, as a Californian, I'm very used to it. I would love to know what you say about that.
So the problem with things like ESG and woke capital is it's basically a welding together of private and public power. So you have these corporations, they're supposed to respond to the best interest of the shareholders. That's why people invest in them. And yet they're kind of abandoning that as their sole function. And they're now saying that they have responsibility to take political stands and try to do through the economy what they would not be able to do through the ballot box. Because a lot of these policies like ESG are very unpopular. Heck, the whole Disney thing that we had to do, the transgender stuff for kindergartners is unpopular in Florida and probably everywhere in America. So the left knows they're not going to win elections on that. So they want to subcontract out their agenda to corporate America, hoping that woke CEOs will try to come down on people like me. And you know what? There are Republicans that have caved to corporations. It's not something that is an aberration. That usually is what happens. Well, with me, that wasn't going to work. Those tactics don't work. I'm standing for the people I represent. We run this state. Big corporations don't. So we made that very clear. But I think the ESG is really, bad policy, higher energy prices, food prices, all that. That's what we will lead to. But even apart from that, it's like, okay, who governs here in a republic? And I think it's like we govern through our processes, and it's not a handful of really large corporations coming in to impose policies on an unwilling public. And so what we're doing with ESG is we are not allowing any of our state pensions to be invested with ESG. We're going to pass statutes to codify that. And then we're also going to police some of the woke banking, where you have discrimination against people based on conservative viewpoints. Some of these big Wall Street banks, they don't like firearms, and so they collude effectively to marginalize like a firearm manufacturer. That's trying to do through their Wall Street power what you can't get through Congress. And so that's a threat to how we govern ourselves. So we're going to be doing stuff to protect people from that.
What would you say to the people who say that's just the free market at work? When a gun company or a woke capital says, oh, we don't want to do anything with guns because we think it's evil, and they say that's the free market just working.
Yeah, but what happens is these are companies are colluding together to where none of them will then offer the financing. And so it ends up having the effect of changing government policy. And so I think the difference is a normal business, they can raise the price of their hamburgers or whatever. Okay, that doesn't affect government policy, but you have massive concentrations of economic power colluding to basically put a thumb on the scale and cause policy in this country to change. That's just a different, that's a bird of a different feather. And so that's what we are looking at, and that's really what we're concerned about. Yes, in a vacuum, if somebody wants to give somebody a loan or not, probably not our concern. But when it's done for a public purpose and they're wielding effectively government power, well, then that becomes something different.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hypocritical oligarchy. These people claim the ESG and then are doing things that totally are disconcerting to everything that they've said behind closed doors all the time.
None of them give up their private jets.
Of course.
I mean, if they say the world's going to end, why aren't they giving up their private jets? I don't see any of them giving up their private jets. They want to impose costs. Their ideology has costs on society, but they're costs that are borne by people that are not in their income strata, very low income people. People in other countries, in very poor countries, will get hammered by a lot of the ESG. And so I think there's really two things with woke capital. One, you have activist employees. Like I think that's what happened in Disney, where they pressure to have different things changed. And I think some of these CEOs think you bend the knee to the mob. The problem is they're going to keep coming after you. They're going to keep eating your lunch. So that's not a good thing. But I do think some of these CEOs are just very power hungry. They can make a lot of money in business, but they don't necessarily have the same impact on society. Well, now they could take their economic power and leverage that to basically be involved in social engineering. And I think some of them really like that. But I think that's very dangerous for a free society.
Yeah, but a lot of people are coming to Florida because of what exactly you're saying. I mean, turning this state red. I mean, you now have 230,000 more Republicans registered in the state than Democrats. How do you respond to that? Why do you think that is? Why are there more Republicans now more than ever?
Look, we were down 300,000 when I got elected to the Democrats. Now we're up 230. On this pace, we're going to be up 250, 260 by election day, maybe even more. Who knows? We've never really seen a change like that of more than 500,000 registrations in just a short period of time. I think what you've seen in the last few years, you've really seen a great American exodus. It's these people are coming to kind of a political promised land where they're fleeing these blue jurisdictions because it's not just higher taxes anymore. It was insane COVID restrictions that were debilitating. It was rioting and criminals basically let loose on the street that undermined public safety. It's woke ideology in schools and all the way that they're hijacking the education system. So I think people just reached their limit. Florida was leading. We were kind of out there doing it differently, taking on really the elites in society. I mean, if you look at the bureaucratic elites, the people in the Biden regime, woke CEOs, tech companies, corporate media, we stood against all of that. And really, I think we're offering something for people that I think they viewed instinctively as more consistent with what America's supposed to be. And so yes, a lot of them are coming to register Republicans, but quite frankly, I think it's less Republican Democrat because there's a lot of people that don't like Republican establishment either, but they're coming to Florida because they like what we've done. And I think what we've been able to do is really do things that are more of a huge American majority, where you have a lot of people that just understand, hey, they have common sense, they're not being diluted in all the nonsense, they have a governor that speaks the truth, and they're getting things done in the right way. So I think it's interesting to just see what happens. We'll see when the dust settles, when the election happens, how many total people have been registered. But clearly, even 2 years ago, if you would have said to people, hey, Republicans may be able to have more than Democrats by the November 22 election, people would have said, well, maybe. If you would have said 250,000, they would have said, no way. They would have said, there's no way that that can happen. And yet here we are, getting close to 250,000 more registered Republicans and Democrats, when in the history of the state of Florida, never once prior to me becoming governor did Republicans have more than Democrats.
Of course. And so the last question that leads in from that is that we talk a lot about politics and the things that are driving people out of other states to come here, why people want to be Republican. But a lot of people my age and even older, and just people throughout America right now, seeing what's happening with the woke corporations, with the anti-religious freedom. What is the way that the government is working to give meaning to people's lives in this state that makes them feel happier and more fulfilled in their lives, that is more than just the politics?
Well, I think that if you during COVID, when people would come in from California or New York, they would say that it was like being in a different country. We really served as America's West Berlin in many respects, that if they could just get out of where they were, if they could just get to Florida, not only would they be free, but they would be happy. And that's the number one thing I think people would say when they came here. Like, people in Florida are happy. And weren't used to that, because they really ground society down. And I think one of the reasons we did what we did in terms of keeping people employed, businesses and all that, was like, yes, if businesses on some downtown are all shuttered, that has an economic impact for sure. But I recognize that has a psychological impact. Even if you have no connection to that, to just see that, it drags everybody down and it creates a malaise. And so we did the opposite, to really kind of lift people up. Give them an opportunity to pursue happiness here and pursue their dreams. So yes, you can look at the economic numbers. We've outperformed those other big states. We have a record budget surplus. We've done all these things, and that's all great. But what is that intangible thing about, hey, I really am proud to be a Floridian, and I was born and raised here. People in the state have never been more proud to be from Florida than they are now. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I think it's intangible quality about living in a free society, understanding that the government is there to actually want you to do well. It isn't going to be there trying to crack down on you. And I think there's a whole host of factors, but there's no question that people that visited Florida said how much happier people were here.
Yeah, well, I'm much happier than living in the streets of Hollywood, I can say that. And happy to start the Florida Standard, and ecstatic that you did this interview with me.
Yeah, good luck to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so
Governor
much. Welcome
DeSantis.
to Florida.
Thank you.
Of
And
course.
thank you, everyone, for watching. We really appreciate it. If you like this video, make sure you share with your friends. Comment your thoughts down below, and follow @the FL Standard on all social media. Check us out on our website. Thanks, guys.